distinguished delegates, I would like to call this workshop to order. Good morning to all the delegates joining our workshop here in Nairobi, and good day to those of you joining us virtually. I extend a warm welcome to each of you. This is an information workshop on the work of the AHTEGs related to 3 agenda items on Substa 26. Namely, on the monitoring framework for the Kunming-Montreal GBF, which is item 3, on the risk assessment and risk management, which is item 6, and on synthetic biology, which is item 5. Regarding item 3, in its decision 15/5, the Conference of the Parties adopted the monitoring framework for Kunming-Montreal GBF and established an ad hoc technical expert group on indicators. Substa 26 is requested to review the outcomes of the expert group, complete the scientific and technical review of the monitoring framework, and to report its findings for the consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation and by Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting. Regarding item 6, COPMOP decision 10/10 established AHTEG on risk assessment and to develop additional voluntary guidance materials for conducting case-by-case risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives in accordance with Annex 3 to the protocol, with a specific focus on engineered gene drives mosquitoes. This decision recalled earlier decisions in which it recommended to the Conference of the Parties to the Convention of Biological Diversity a coordinated approach with the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety on the issue of synthetic biology. It should be taken into account the possibility that the provisions of the protocol might also apply to living organisms resulting from synthetic biology. Substa 26 is requested to consider the outcomes of the AHTEG on risk assessment and to make a recommendation for consideration of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol at its 11th meeting. And finally, regarding item 5, COP decision 15/31 on synthetic biology established a process for broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment of the most recent technological developments in synthetic biology and established a multidisciplinary AHTEG on synthetic biology to support this process. Substa 26 is requested to consider the outcomes of the horizon scanning process contained in the report of the multidisciplinary AHTEG and to make recommendations for consideration by the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting and, as appropriate, by the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol at its 11th meeting and by the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol at its 5th meeting. Substa 26 is also requested to consider the report on effectiveness of the horizon scanning process and to make a recommendation on the need to extend that process. The modus operandi of Substa explains that the role of AHTEGs is to provide scientific and technical advice and assessment to the Substa. As such, both the mandates and the composition of AHTEGs are crucial in improving the quality of scientific, technical, and technological information for Substa and ultimately to the COP. AHTEGs may be established under the guidance of the COP as required for a limited duration on specific priority areas of work of the COP. After a peer review process and consideration by the Substa, assessment reports may be issued as CBD technical series publications, of which the Secretariat has produced exactly 100 to date. Since 2002, the Secretariat has convened 57 meetings of various AHTEGs established under the convention or protocols. The three expert group that will be, which results will be presented today, met in total 11 times since adoption of Kunming-Montreal GBF and have produced robust results. The Substa Bureau decided to convene this information workshop to raise the quality of scientific and technical discussion at the 26th meeting of Substa by effectively informing delegates of the outcomes of these expert groups relating to 3 of the 7 items on Substa agenda. I wish to extend my gratitude to the chairs and co-chairs of 3 ad hoc technical expert groups, Maria Cecilia Londoño Murcia of Colombia, James Williams of UK, Maria Ruohonen Lehto of Finland, Kishma Primus Ormond of Antigua and Barbuda, and Florian Rabits of Lithuania for their able leadership, skill, and dedication. I would also like to commend the 112 members of AHTEGs for their extremely diligent efforts and insightful contributions during the intersessional period. They showed great commitment, and their group's results would not have been possible without their unique expertise. Finally, I thank the Secretariat for their excellent support in convening the necessary in-person and online meetings, as well as managing difficult timelines. I trust this information workshop will enrich delegates' understanding of the progress that has been made of these 3 important issues, and I wish you all productive deliberations at Substa 26. I now hand the floor over to the Secretary of the Substa, Ms. Jihan Lee, Director of Science, Society, and Sustainable Futures Divisions. Jihan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends, good morning and welcome to all of you, and good day to all those joining by virtual platform. I'd like to also thanking the Bureau of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice, or SBSTTA, for this great initiative, and also for the chair for her leadership. This information workshop provides us with an important opportunity to raise awareness of technical processes that have been undertaken under both the convention and the protocols related to the agenda items of the Substa 26. In particular, the work on monitoring framework, synthetic biology, and risk assessment, among others, represent key advancement for the convention and the Cartagena Protocol. Building on what you have heard from the chair, let me reiterate some of the major developments since COP15 and MOP10 in these 3 fields, in particular through the work of respective ad hoc technical expert groups. First, regarding AHTEG on indicators, since its establishment by COP15, the AHTEG on indicators has worked tirelessly to address the outstanding technical issues related to the monitoring framework. As a result, all headline and binary indicators now have metadata. Guidance on the disaggregation of the headline indicators has been produced, and the list of component and complementary indicators has been reviewed. Guidance has also been provided on Section C of the framework when implementing indicators for the consistent measuring of ecosystem across the framework, on capacity need, on areas where future research is required, and on building national biodiversity observation network. The AHTEG on indicators received inputs from the 3 meetings of the Technical Expert Group on Financial Reporting, which developed the indicators for Goal D, Target 18, and Target 19. In addition, the AHTEG on indicators also received key inputs from the working group on the Article 8J process to develop the traditional knowledge indicators, informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation, the liaison group for the Cartagena Protocol, the dedicated expert group on pesticides, and the studies on ABS indicators and on private finance. Moreover, the AHTEG has also conducted 17 webinars to share the technical information behind their guidance with delegates and stakeholders. Next, regarding multidisciplinary AHTEG on synthetic biology, for the work on synthetic biology, it is crucial to acknowledge that the first horizon scanning process under the convention has been conducted. To accomplish this advancement, the first multidisciplinary AHTEG was established with representation by a greater diversity of stakeholders, including this time women and youth. The work entailed both developing and running a custom CBD-made horizon scanning methodology using a multidisciplinary approach in less than 1 year. In addition, this multidisciplinary AHTEG also developed a series of options for capacity building, technology transfer, and knowledge sharing. The multidisciplinary expert group had rich inputs from 3 submissions of information processes, 3 online forums, and an undertaking of extensive literature review. Beyond this, the co-chairs have conducted a series of bilateral consultations which led to breakthroughs at the last meeting of multidisciplinary expert group and allowed the group to deliver on their mandates. Next, AHTEG on risk assessment. For the first time, guidance material have been produced for the key work on risk assessment and risk management under the Cartagena Protocol. These materials follow the process developed under Decision CP 9/13 for the identification and prioritization of specific issues of risk assessment of living modified organisms that may warrant consideration. The additional voluntary guidance materials to support case-by-case risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives reflects the best modern practices in the field of risk assessment in alignment with the provision and procedures outlined in the protocol. This work on risk assessment was supported by 2 online forums, submissions of information, and the commissioning of a detailed outline. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, I'd like to take this moment to express our sincere thanks to all the AHTEG members who have worked tirelessly and with adding such a value to support these processes. I also join the chair in expressing our special thanks to all the co-chairs and chair of 3 AHTEGs. I will not repeat their names, you have said. Before I conclude, please allow me to acknowledge the generous financial contribution that have made all this work possible. I have very long list. For the AHTEG on indicators, we thank the European Union, the government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the government of Canada. For the work on synthetic biology, we thank the European Union. For the work on risk assessment, we thank the government of Finland and the European Union. Finally, for this very workshop today, we thank the European Union. We thank you so much. With this, I wish you a fruitful workshop discussion and hope that this information exchange will support delegates in the upcoming deliberation at Substa 26, starting in 2 days next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat and Jihan. And thank you for the organization of this workshop on behalf of Substa Bureau. Now, I would like to invite co-chairs of Ad Hoc Technical Expert Group on Indicators for Kunming Montreal GBF, Ms. Maria Cecilia Londoño Murcia and Mr. James Williams, to provide a brief background of the group's mandate and to describe a progress made by group. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Senka. Thank you, Jihan, for those kind words. While we get the slides onto the screen, I would like to acknowledge the amount of work that's been done and to thank the AHTEG for their work. If we can have the mouse. So it's been an honor to co-chair this workshop or to co-chair this AHTEG with Maria, but it's definitely been a team effort. Oops, 1 second. Right. Technology, it's great stuff, isn't it? So firstly, to remind you all that the monitoring framework was agreed as part of a package of work agreed at COP15, and that included the establishment of the AHTEG on indicators, 45 experts selected from 242 nominations. So a lot of interest in the area. We met 6 times. 4 times online, twice face-to-face. And as Jihan has said, many thanks to those who contributed funds to enable those meetings to take place. But I want to stress that it's important to recognise the amount of work that went on between those meetings, both in terms of bilateral discussions, meetings with custodian agencies for particular indicators, and generally a lot of work to try and get our heads around all of the issues across the entirety of the monitoring framework. And it's worth perhaps looking at that monitoring framework from a party perspective to just remind ourselves of the components that we have within it. And firstly, we have a set of headline and binary indicators. Then we have a set of complementary and component indicators. The headline and binary indicators are mandatory for parties to use in their national reporting. The component and complementary indicators are intended to be optional, but to help parties to understand progress that they're making. And therefore, from a national perspective, it's going to be important that parties do implement the headline and binary indicators, but also consider strongly which of the component and complementary indicators they're going to be able to take to use. And I think it's worth noting as well that there's about 250 indicators in the totality there. So I think it's unlikely that any party will implement them all, and therefore a balance between pragmatism and idealism is needed. These are indicators, they are providing indications. In some cases, they are proxies rather than direct measurement. We need to be cognizant that we don't have a perfect answer, but we do have some very good progress compared with where we were when we started to think about measuring the 2010 target way back when. So in October 2023, when we had our first meeting in face-to-face meeting in Montreal, we came up with a classification status to try and understand how far progress had been made with each of the indicators. And you can see that there's a set of 5 steps there, from basically needing to start to fully operational. As at the end of our second face-to-face meeting in Cambridge, I'm delighted to be able to say that significant progress has been made. The indicators that are marked in blue, there are ones that have moved at least 1 grade, and in some cases more than 1 grade. The ones marked with a red star are the ones that did not have a methodology at COP15. There are 2 there, 1.1 and 9.1, that are still at the first stage, and it's worth touching on those just briefly. Firstly, 1.1 is about spatial planning, both in the marine and the terrestrial sphere. It's actually quite a difficult subject in terms of which number do you ask parties to report, because the target, as with all of the targets, is complicated. And therefore, it's actually quite difficult. Do you give the number that's the amount that's under terrestrial and marine? Do you give the terrestrial and marine separately? How do you deal with biodiversity inclusive? How do you deal with the other elements within that target? And I'm afraid, although we've been able to make quite some progress, we weren't able to come up with the metadata for the headline indicator in that case. There is, however, a binary indicator for target 1. For target 9, 9.1, that is a subset of the B1 effectively, so it's ecosystem services provided by wild species. And again, it's not been possible to come to a conclusion on exactly what to recommend to measure in that case. And for both of those indicators, further work is required. And in addition, for those that are not yet fully operational, there is work that needs to be taken forward over the next few months and probably into the next year as well. So we've made considerable progress, but I would like to stress that there is more to be done. So we have updated the metadata for all of the headline indicators. We've provided added information on a variety of studies that you have mentioned, and I will come to a bit more detail about that in a moment. And I've just touched on 1.1 and 9.1. In terms of the binary indicators, we've created metadata for all of them. We have provided advice on possible wording changes following from the conversations here at Substa 25 in terms of how those wordings might be taken forward. And we've also provided advice on an aggregation method for how to bring the answers to multiple questions together to a single number to assess progress. We provided a glossary, which is in INF 14, and we've also undertaken work on a gap analysis, and we will hear more about that later this morning. And also a capacity building survey, which also we'll be hearing more about later. Both the gap analysis and the capacity building survey are within INF 19. So we're going to talk in a moment about the approach to Section C. Maria is going to do that, so I will let her provide the detail. And then after the coffee break, we will talk about traditional knowledge indicators, the finance indicators, and the ABS indicators. So again, I don't intend to go into any detail on those because there will be separate presentations on each of them. Just want to go back to the binary indicators for a moment, though, if I may, please, because we're going to be discussing that as part of the negotiations, as I understand it. And the intention here from the AHTEG's advice to start off with at Substa 25 was to break questions down into multiple simpler questions and also to have more nuanced answers. We've come up with some ideas about how to aggregate those, and I'll go through a little bit of detail in that in just a second. But before I do, I want to flag that in our latest advice, we're suggesting a one-to-one match to slightly simplify the wording of the standard answers. And the reason for doing that is to try to make sure that it is simpler and easier for parties to understand. We realized that there were some language issues that people perhaps needed to perhaps understand a little better. So in terms of that aggregation, if you have a multiple choice question and you have answered all of the parts of it, you are meeting that point fully. If you've answered one or more points, you're partially meeting it. If you've answered none of them, you're not meeting it. And that helps us to then map those answers onto the standard 4 answers that are being produced for many of the other questions. And that then enables us to come up with a 6-point scale, an ordinal scale I should be stressing here, in order to look at progress from nothing being done to all of the questions being met fully. And the advantage of that is that it allows us to have more nuance in the progress that is being made during the rest of the decade, in particular in the answers that parties may be able to provide in their national reports in 2026 and 2029. It will also hopefully enable comparison there. And I think there is a question for parties to consider about how to undertake coming up with the answers to those binary questions. That is obviously up to yourselves in terms of how you do it country by country. But they may also need to think about whether or not it's worth doing that assessment just for those reports or perhaps more frequently. That might also enable you to see progress and to see where more work needs to be undertaken. So for the main paper for Substa 26, Substa 26.2, we have a lot of information provided in terms of the background summary of the work, and in particular the draft recommendation, and quite a lot of information within the 3 annexes. There is also, of course, the recommendation that came from Substa 25, and we've provided an addendum document in terms of further advice on the questions within the Substa 25 recommendation. And the reason for that was we were asked specifically not to edit that document. We've also provided 2 major INF docs, which together are about 400 pages. The first one provides information on how to implement the monitoring framework, including the aggregation method in more detail that I've just explained to you, but also information about Section C on the cross-cutting considerations for the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and how to address those. It provides all of the metadata for all of the binary and the headline indicators, and it provides the glossary that I mentioned earlier. Oops, hit the wrong one again. And then INF 19, which is more recently out, provides information about those global biodiversity information services and the capacity building service and survey and the gap analysis. And we will cover that later this morning as well. So Gio mentioned that we'd had a lot of input. We've had a huge amount of input on TK indicators, from the liaison group, from the ABS protocol work. There's a special meeting that FAO convened on target 7, the indicator 7.2. The informal advisory group on technical scientific cooperation provided advice on target 20. Finance indicators from the technical expert group meetings that they took part in, and a capacity building survey. All of the stuff that came through in terms of the online forum, and that information was very helpful, both in informing us, but also informing the gap analysis, and lots and lots and lots of advice from individuals and from organizations that has helped us take our work forward. And I therefore want to finish by thanking the AHTEG for an enormous amount of work, and thanking the Secretariat in particular, and also UNEP WCMC for their support in enabling us to take this work forward and bring it to you at this meeting and at COP16. And I will finish with the words that I gave to the AHTEG in terms of thanking them at the end of our meeting in Cambridge for the work that they had done. Thank you very much indeed, and I will now pass over to Maria for her presentation on Section C. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, James. And I also want to start by acknowledging the work of all the AHTEG members and all the other persons involved. And I want to particularly thank James for your support and all the things I have learned from you during almost this year. And to Gillian also, because of the support you have given me in the last months of this work. So I will go through the summary of what the results were, when we analyze how Section C could be implemented and its relationship with the monitoring framework. So basically, Section C of the Global Biodiversity Framework stands really states the need of several items, very important items that need to be considered when implementing all the agreement, all the framework. So the task of the AHTEG was to review and give guidelines on how to implement Section C and its relationship with the monitoring framework. Here we have the list of all those issues that are stated in Section C and that need to be considered when parties implement monitoring and the indicators. So basically, we abort this topic in two ways. And the first way was, how can we use the monitoring framework to monitor the implementation of Section C? So obviously, when we thought and the parties negotiate the monitoring framework, there was not a thought of indicators that strictly monitor if parties were implementing Section C. So the first thing that we did was review all the indicators that were on the monitoring framework, the headline and the binary indicators, and see which elements of the indicators could be used for tracking progress towards Section C. And basically, there are two things. When we use the disaggregations of the indicators, we have good elements for tracking Section C in some elements, in some of those issues. And also some of the questions that we suggest for the binary indicators also cover those aspects. So in the document Substat 26/2, and in Annex 2 and Table 2, you can find very easily and in a very concrete way the results of this part of the work. In the first column, you have all those issues in Section C, and then you have in the next column the finding and the guidelines of the AHTEG in its results. So we can see in the second column the linkages to the indicators particularly, and to the elements of those indicators that are useful for implementing Section C. So you have to read this table with Annex 1 table, because in the Annex 1, you have the disaggregation for each of the indicators. As James told you, we have more than 400 pages of results, so I know it's difficult to navigate through them, but just wanted to make sure that you have in your mind both of those tables and their relations with the guidelines for Section C. Then the other way of thinking of Section C and the monitoring framework was, how do we include all those items of Section C in the operationalization of the indicators and of the monitoring itself? And in that, there are basically two findings. And the one is that we need stronger and more efficient monitoring systems and information systems. And in that way, we could include many of the elements in Section C. And the other very important one is to include indicators that are important from other values, perspectives, and knowledge systems in the monitoring framework. So how do we go with obtaining stronger monitoring systems and processes? And here we give a set of guidelines, and we take some existing guidelines and put it into Info 14 for you to have in a bigger detail when particularly national indicator and monitoring system are being developed. One very important thing is to make all the monitoring in a very participatory way. And this includes an inclusive design and an implementation of the monitoring. So that participation really needs to be an active participation of very different type of stakeholders, and particular IPLCs. There is a lot of progress in community-based monitoring and information system that needs to be used and get into considerations when implementing monitoring systems. There is also important implications for the use and the sharing of the information. And for those issues, we have some good guidelines that need to be more implemented. So the free and prior informed consent must be something that needs to be in the front of every processing in monitoring. There are the FAIR principles that talk about making more accessible and open the scientific data. And we have also the CARE principles that talk about the control and respect of the data that is produced by other knowledge systems. We also have guidelines on human right-based approach to data. This meaning that parties need to be very aware of the stakeholders that are in care of their rights when we are talking about monitoring data, biodiversity data, and also the stakeholders that are the ones responsible for protecting those rights that need to be clearly stated and included in the monitoring systems. And also the monitoring framework and systems need to include a lot of information from different perspectives. So there is quite a lot of work to do to enhance existing and to implement new monitoring systems with the vision of all these items related and agree in Section C of the Global Biodiversity Framework. As I mentioned, it's very important, the human rights approach to the QMI-Montreal monitoring framework. And so we make a special mention to how to include these guidelines into the monitoring and in the indicators now. Some aspects, for example, of SDG indicator 16.10.1 are useful if we use them in the binary indicator for target 22. And in that sense, we are using specific indicators in the monitoring framework to include aspects of human rights. And in that sense, we are advancing towards the monitoring of that item 7 on human rights-based approach. So this is a way on how we used the existing indicators to include items that were related to the Section C of the framework. Also, we have specific indicators for the item of the contributions of indigenous people and local communities, and we will follow up with a presentation of those indicators, particularly the results of the process of the Article 8J, and we will have a specific presentation for that in some minutes. The other important issue is the ecosystem-based approach. So this is another issue of Section C, and for that, the monitoring framework is a big opportunity. There are some headline indicators, the ones that are listed there, that need information about ecosystems, are following ecosystems particularly. Meaning that the targets and the goals were framed thinking on ecosystems. If we start using ecosystems to report on those indicators, we will start understanding what is threatening the ecosystems, how much ecosystems are there still, what are the services that those ecosystems provide, how much of those ecosystems are being restored, how much of those ecosystems are being protected, and what are the impacts of many of the actions, including, for example, invasive species, pollutions, climate change into ecosystems. So the recommendation of the SBSTTA is to use an integrated ecosystem approach to report on the indicators. In that sense, the theory of change could be let's say, happen through the use of the indicators and its use to guide action and to know the progress that we are having in the goals. The important part for this thing to happen is that we will need to be coherent in the information we use through all those indicators in the sense of the ecosystems. Because if we want to analyze all those things together, we will need to talk about the same ecosystem or the same area for that ecosystems, in particularly in each of the countries. So the recommendation is to use the same typology for the ecosystems so that we can have a coherence and then make that theory of change possible, and that relationship between the indicators, the different indicators, and the goals. So this is the IUCN ecosystem typology. AHTEG recommend to use the level 3 ecosystem functional group, because they are in the middle of between national, more detailed information and very global information, and that gives us a good scale of detail where we can not just follow up how we are doing in something, but also guide decisions on that. Yes, let's go to the other one. So here I have an example of that level of level 3 in the typology. So for example, here we have the typology that is pyrrhic savannas. This is the level that we could use for reporting the headline indicators. And if you see, is the same for these 3 different ecosystems that will be different under a level 4. But here they are related with their process and dynamics and the pressures they might be having. So that's why we recommend that level 3 of aggregation between that. So basically the general recommendations in the INF 14, the guidelines we are giving in section 3C for the implementation of section C, are divided in these 2 big items: the use of indicators and its disaggregation for the monitoring of section C, some more specific materials and guidelines for making items in section C implemented in the monitoring process, and finally all the guidelines for the use of the ecosystem typology across the indicators. Thank you. So that is it. I think we can have a moment for questions.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I should have said thank you to you at the start as well. I believe the Secretariat may want to do some housekeeping about use of microphones and so on.
Thank you. Yes. So a few announcements. One is that the arrangement today is old school. So as you maybe are aware, in SBSTTA you enter codes. Today this is not the case. The mics are open. So if you would like to take the floor, you'll need to raise your hand so that you can be called on, because if you press the button, your mic will automatically go on. So it will be a hand raising system. Additionally, for the people who are connected online, you will need to log out at lunchtime and log back in. We will close the meeting during lunch because we can only keep a Teams meeting open so long. So you'll have to log out and log back in. Additionally, when we then package this up into videos, it will also be in blocks of time so that it will make the information easier to find. I'll also mention, while I have the floor, for those of you who aren't aware, that coffee will be provided outside. Lunch is going to be available in the cafeteria. And finally, I'll mention that, as you'll see in the other presentations, the AHTEG has decided to make this a very interactive session, which is why you will hear from different members of the AHTEG. So you maybe saw on Maria's slides different people's names. So these are members of the AHTEG. The first one who was mentioned represents SPREP and was preparing the slides but couldn't come to present on section C. And the second one was IUCN and also couldn't come. And so Maria presented on behalf of these people, which is why there was different names on the slides that maybe people noticed. So I think we have a few minutes then for questions and answers. Remember, just raise your hand and then we'll break for coffee. Thanks. Please.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Madam Chair of SBSTTA, Madam Chair of CBD, Madam, because gender issue here is overwhelming here. Secondly, certainly, huge efforts already being made by the different co-chairs. Having said that, and looking at all of the participants here, I'm getting worried. I'm not getting worried, not because of the good work you are doing, but I'm worried about the time frame. We are supposed within few months from now, we should be finishing MBSAP. And most of the countries already have done most of the work. But when it comes to already the proposed indicators at national level, I keep asking myself, who's going to do this? Especially when you ask for many workshops, many engagement, most of these activities at national level are very, very expensive. And to get these people almost on a weekly basis, who's going to pay for all of this and who got the resources for doing this? So my question is very clear. Who's going to do the implementation? Because we are talking about here several things. We are talking about understanding, action-oriented, implementation, and reporting and evaluation. How can we manage with time? Again, from national perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, and I think your concern is something that many other parties have. What we really intended is to make guidelines more practical as possible for the parties to make this. Now the parties need to report on these indicators. And what I can say is that there are many indicators that might be ready or are ready for reporting if you, and data is there ready. So you can do that using global data sets that are already there, or you can also, the country can also think in the most important priorities for the development of their own national monitoring systems. And in that sense, the work of the AHTEG prioritize and give parties elements to where to focus the attention to do that. We know how expensive and difficult it is to implement monitoring systems, but we also know the importance of having them stated and functional. So in that sense, it goes. I don't know, James, if you want to complement. Or...
If I may, thank you very much. Thank you to Mustafa for the question. I think this is a really important point because COP15 agreed to have a set of targets and agreed to have a set of monitoring framework in lockstep. And that's an important step forwards in terms of understanding how we are actually making progress at a national and at a global level in terms of the very ambitious framework that we've set ourselves. But it now comes down to implementation. The work that the AHTEG has done has been to try to help to provide the technical advice to be able to say, these are the indicators, these are how you would implement them. It's now up to parties to implement them. That's not something that is going to happen magically overnight. It's going to require some hard work. But that is what was committed to at COP15.
Okay. Yes, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody, in this nice Nairobi UNEP room. We really would like to congratulate the AHTEG members, the Secretariat, UNEP WCMC, and all the experts who contributed to this amazing work. In a very, very short time, we saw very important documents coming to parties, providing a lot of information, very useful information to be used at national level, which will help us. Of course, it won't happen overnight. As my colleague from Egypt just mentioned, there is a lot of work to be done before we can get there. It's a long journey. We knew that already at COP15. But it's really a huge step forward. Also, the fact that all the documents were available in time, that we could review them, even if it's not finished yet. We hope that we can continue provide comments to the Secretariat. And as my colleague from Egypt said, now the challenge is to build the capacity in all the regions of the world. And we see an amazing opportunity to use the forthcoming regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers to really support parties, help exchange information, guidance, expertise, also across regions, within and across regions, because by 2026, when we'll have to submit the first report, we know that it will be far from perfect, but it's already an amazing step forward. So my intervention is really to thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, please.
All right. Thank you very much. I wanted just to also thank the AHTEG for the hard work. And these indicators will really be useful for us at the national level. I wanted to get some more clarity based on the first presentation. I remember there was a slide that was indicating which indicators are still missing some methodologies and the like. And just to be clear in terms of the amount maybe of indicators or the amount of work that has not been concluded, specifically for which indicators are those the ones that were presented, the ones where we have outstanding work, or it was just some of them, just to have an idea of how much work still remains, and so that we can figure out what we do in terms of adopting what is already there and not there as we develop our national processes. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. And before you close your microphone, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Patso from Malawi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will talk about that after the coffee break in detail. But for now, if you see Annex 1 of the document, you can see there every indicator, headline indicator, and binary indicator, which are the step forwards that are needed to happen. So there is great detail, but we will cover your question in the next session. Please. Annex 2.
Thank you very much for the floor. I'm Daniel Mukubi from Democratic Republic of the Congo. I'd also like to thank the AHTEG for the work done and for the progress made, which is very, very useful for us But here I wonder, because when we see the presentation, we see that goal D, which is one of the most important for the achieving of the many targets for the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity GBF are not yet ready for use. And this can be very difficult for us, particularly in developing countries. So my question here is whether there are any plans for capacity building sessions on the use of indicators, particularly as part of the implementation of NBSAPs and the preparation of the 7th National Biodiversity Report. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have presentation after the break about those indicators in particular and their challenges. Means of implementation is one of those sections where we have the least information available and where parties and the global community needs to make more investment in putting the monitoring systems in place. And I guess that as Ann Taylor was mentioning, the regional and global capacity and regional centers for capacity development should be on the task of some of these, attending these needs. James.
Thank you. I mean, I think that the status codes that we've got there reflect where we've got to. In some cases, particularly as you're getting into status 2 and 3, it's actually about going away and testing, and it's going away and implementing. So to get to fully operational, we've got the situation where we need parties to actually be doing it. So there is a little bit of chicken and egg here of take the metadata that's now available and see how to apply it, test it, refine it, do it. So I hope that the work that's been done, and Juan will give more information in the session following this as one of our follow-on presentations. I hope that that will help in terms of parties are going to need to look at how do we actually implement this in detail at a national level. There is no magic bullet there. There's a lot of work to be done.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and I'm a delegation from Japan. So I'd like to ask a very quick question on that. So are there any plans to make further improvements or revisions in the future based on submissions from countries to the info documents and the discussions at SBSTTA 26, particularly before COP26 for the final adoption of the monitoring framework? Thank you.
So,
if I
Gillian,
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
If I could answer on this is really up to SBSTTA to decide. So I think that this is something that would need to be decided there, and there would need to be a request in order to do so. Thanks.
In the back there.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. My name is Catherine de Bruyn. I'm from Belgium. Well, first of all, I would like to join previous speakers that congratulated the AHTEG. It is indeed a tremendous job they've done, and the quality of it is really excellent. So we really want to congratulate them. I had a question. I think it's to James. One of his slides was on the 6-point scale on the binary indicators. Could we have a little more information on this? Because I think this could guide the potential discussions we'll have on the binary indicators. So yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to ask. Thank you very much.
Sorry, technology is against me again. I couldn't see. I got the mic on. Thank you, Catherine. The idea here is that you are able, if you have the standard 4 answers, and we can map the answers from the multiple choice questions onto those in terms of yes fully, yes partially, no, then you can actually then come up with some rules to say, if all of your answers are no, you haven't started. If all of your answers are yes fully, you've met it all. So that's the extremes of the scale. And then as you move in, what we're looking at is the amount of implementation that has been done. So at the next point up from none, under development or partial or developing. Next one down from the top, yes fully or yes partially. So you're making really good progress, but you haven't quite got there. And then in the middle, the answers are really distinguished by whether there is a yes fully answered question or whether there's a yes partially answered question. And the idea there is that it provides a nuanced scale in terms of progress that's being made, in terms of the different questions that are being asked with respect to each indicator. And those questions themselves should be looking at the different parts of the target or the different parts of the indicator. So the aim is to try to make sure that the answers that parties provide are able to show progress, and that progress is able to be integrated into a single answer for each indicator, which then can be compared time on time in terms of revisiting those questions at a later point. I hope that helps.
Okay, we need to make a break. I'm going to give a person the last time for the floor before the break. But after the break, we are having members of the AHTEG here, and we will have more discussion. So please keep your questions that we will have time after the break for them and for the discussion. So please, Ezequiel.
Thank you very much, Ezequiel Benitez from Mexico. Also to join the ones who congratulate the AHTEG for the amount of work. I had the opportunity to be in the 2 in-person meetings and to testify how much work is involved. Congratulations for this InfDoc 14 with more than 300 pages, where can show us parties where to get information to use different indicators. This is a big compilation of metadata and methodologies, which was part of the request to the AHTEG. So in order to give the best benefit of our work here in SBSTTA, with the clear understanding that headline indicators and binary indicators were already adopted by COP, those are not open to any negotiation, but to have clarity on the methodologies available to finish the pending work on the questions on the binary in order to propose a SBSTTA to the COP, this revised monitoring framework. I think this webinar, this meeting or workshop is been very useful in to have this clarity. We have the methodologies there. We need to work on the questions and to use them for the national reports. It's still open to receive more comments on the INF document, as I understand, in the period from now to COP, in order to COP to get this revised version of the monitoring work framework. So I do thank a lot to both co-chairs, to Maria and James for the incredible amount of work done and the leadership, and also the Secretariat and the many participants of the AHTEG. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. If I may say, it's really very great pleasure to hear first reactions of this group on the results of AHTEG. I will inform you that here in the room are around 190 participants, and online we do have participation of 100. So we see really very good reactions, and we see also very important questions. Many of them will be explained in the second part of the session related to AHTEG indicators. Now I would like to suggest we go for a very short break of 15 minutes and come back. Enjoy your coffee outside.
Yeah, you have the number. Do you want me to write it somewhere or? It's, yeah, 190 is good as well. It's what? It's now in the record. Oh, okay. I think that's fine. No, there is 100. Oh, I didn't, know. Well, I mean, I've also got a couple of dents where I was trying to get, so 177, 190.
Yeah, it's close enough.
Close enough. Yeah.
Ray,
Slides on there. Absolutely. I'm just standing there and looking sideways at them.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
No, you can see it.
Right. Okay. I mean, I can also put this.
Because there and just run it through in power. Well, let's look on the thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Is it this one?
Hello, we will start in just a few minutes. So I would encourage people to start to move towards your seats. So as mentioned, we're going to start in a few minutes. Also, as you're coming in the room, I'm going to make an announcement, which is that a number of people have emailed or texted me asking for the slides. And so we'll post them on the webpage for this meeting so that that way you can find them there. Thanks.
Dear delegates, I will invite now co-chairs of AHTEG on indicators to continue the session. Please take your seats.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and welcome back, everybody. We have three presentations to give you for this next session. Firstly, on the traditional knowledge indicators, Georgie and Maurizio will provide that information. Secondly, on the finance indicators, and Juan will provide that information. And thirdly, on the ABS indicators, and Nantaka will provide that information. So we have a series of three short presentations and then some time for questions and answers. Please hold your questions to the end of the three presentations, though. We need to get through all three. Thank you very much indeed. And with that, if I may, please, can I invite Georgie and Maurizio to take the floor?
Greetings to everyone. Thanks for participating in this information session. We actually realized as we were doing the work on indicators that information sharing is extremely important. So I'll be sharing a bit on the process of the TK indicators, their current status, and also on possible next steps to be taken. Just a short review of the process so far. COP16 asked Working Group 8J12 to review the new program of work on 8J and other provisions of the convention related to indigenous peoples and local communities. Another decision requested 8J to review the traditional knowledge indicators under the joint program on the links between biological and cultural diversity. And following this meeting, the Secretariat of the CBD carried out a technical and scientific review of the traditional knowledge indicators and how they relate to the monitoring framework. And this was done in early 2024 in response to that request. So, and as part of that, an expert meeting on traditional knowledge indicators was also held in March in Cambridge. And the intention of this was that the technical review of the traditional knowledge indicators should inform and be considered within the KMGBF monitoring framework. So an advanced copy of the technical review, as well as the outcomes of the of the expert workshop on traditional knowledge indicators, were shared with that AHTEG at its second in-person meeting. And the outcomes of the review are available in several documents on Substa 26.2, also in Inf 11, and there you have the copy of the scientific and technical review and the metadata sheets, and also in Inf 14 that discusses section C of the KMGBF. So here we have these two complementary processes. Clearly the main convened Montreal GBF and the monitoring framework as adopted in COP16. And we also have the traditional indicators, which had been adopted as a suite of indicators in previous COP decisions to monitor progress on the work of on traditional knowledge and other provisions of the convention. So these are on linguistic diversity, on land use change and land tenure, in the practice of traditional occupations, as well as the degree to which traditional knowledge and practices are respected through the full integration, participation, and safeguards in national implementation of the strategic plan. So these were the TK indicators that had been adopted by earlier COPs. So the work that was undertaken was to see how these traditional knowledge indicators can be included in the KMGBF monitoring framework, because traditional knowledge is a cross-cutting issue in the CBD, and also the TK indicators are cross-cutting, for example, participation in goals and targets, and also in specific goals and targets adopted in the GBF. So we can see how this contributed to those headline, binary, component, and complementary indicators. There were some findings arising from the technical and scientific review. One is that the substantive contents of the traditional knowledge indicators actually correspond to internationally recognized rights of indigenous peoples. You know, the ones that were already mentioned, the contents of the TK indicators. And as such, the traditional knowledge indicators can be monitored applying the well-established UN human rights monitoring framework, which was also mentioned in the human rights-based approach. And that framework contains structural, process, and outcome indicators, as well as underlying norms and principles of access to information, full and effective participation, access to remedy, and justice. And actually, in the review, we saw that there are already existing tools on community-based monitoring and information systems, such as the Indigenous Navigator as just one, and also local biodiversity outlooks, which has been assessing progress being made on contributions of IPs and LCs. My colleague Mauricio will talk us through the current status of the TK indicators in the monitoring framework.
Yeah, thank you very much and good day, everyone. So very briefly, is the last two slides is basically to reflect on how that technical and scientific review of the TK indicators got fed so far into the SBSTA document that will be discussed in the coming days here. So we have a reference to it in SBSTA 26/2, which obviously is the main monitoring framework. There is a headline indicator on the traditional occupations. This was already adopted at COP15, and the technical review confirmed that that was a valid indicator to be kept as a headline indicator. There are also binary indicators for target 9 and 22. In here, when you look at the binary indicators questions, you will see that there are brackets that will need to be resolved in the next few days. There are component indicators, traditional knowledge indicators used as component indicators for target 21, 22, and 23. And we could go into details in the discussion phase if we have time. And then there was quite a lot of discussion that it was in reference to what Maria presented earlier on the disaggregation of headline indicators, taking into account traditional knowledge indicators and section C. So you will see, for example, that in the 26/2, these headline indicators A1, A2, B1, 2.1, 3.1, and 10.2, they are all proposed to be disaggregated, for example, by indigenous and traditional territories. So it's in relevance to the traditional knowledge indicator on land use tenure and land use change. Then there is a lot more information in 26-11. Metadata sheets for all the 40K indicators have been developed there. There are also additional recommendations for the use of the TK indicators in the monitoring framework. So some of that is reflected in 26/2, but there are additional recommendations in there. So we invite parties to have a look at that technical and scientific review. And then in 26-14, there is 3 key points arising. One is the use of TK indicators provides operationalizations of various considerations under Section C, particularly the ones related to the rights and contributions of IPLCs, human rights-based approach, diverse value systems, and whole of society approach. The whole package of the 40K indicators can be used to address cross-cutting relevance of traditional knowledge for the framework. And also the AHTEG considered that the traditional knowledge indicator on land use change and land tenure by indigenous peoples and local communities could meet the criteria required for a headline indicator. And in summary, some of the summaries that come out from this review and the interaction with the monitoring framework is that, as you know, as James was indicating earlier, much progress has been made on the TK indicators since the last meeting of the working group on AJ last November, with the support of many key collaborators. I'm not going to list them there because we're short of time. The important contributions of the TK indicators and their cross-cutting nature to the monitoring framework are now better understood and valued. And so they've started to be much more fully reflected into the monitoring framework. There are still gaps, however. So some of these gaps also relate to the fact that there is much less data related to local communities compared to indigenous peoples, and also that the indicators need wider application, especially at the national level. So we hope that parties will actually take proactive action in the next years to come to employ them at the national level. Now, in terms of next steps for future development and operationalizations, those have been identified. So activities will need to continue both under the new program of work on Article AJ, as well as SBSTTA, and through the national implementation and CBMIS, community-based monitoring and information systems. And I think that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Georgie and Maurizio, for that summary. Very helpful and very much appreciated. If I can now pass to Juan, please, for the finance indicators presentation. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So briefly, we're going to talk about, before we go into the details of finance indicators, the scope of the work. So basically, we were tasked on analyzing the indicators that were related to finance mobilization, that is 18.1, 18.2, D1, D2, and D3. I'm not going to read the slides, you have them there, but basically the work of the TEG sort of narrowed scope on that, on sort of those 5 indicators and their considerations. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the work of the TEG, we met in person twice and we had multiple online meetings to sort of discuss the indicators. During the meetings in Montreal, we divided the work into subgroups. So each subgroup would take, would develop one of the indicators, would analyze the methodologies, the background information, and in general terms, everything related to the indicator. After the work, we met in Istanbul and we revised all the different metadata sheets. Well, we built them through the intersessional period, then we built the metadata sheets, and then we started analyzing one by one. After that, we presented the results in AHTEG, and here we are. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Having a bit of an issue moving with the slides, but we'll resume in 2 seconds. Excellent. Thank you. So here you have the indicators. Again, I'm not going to read them all in detail, but as you can see, 18.1, 18.2, they have to do with positive and negative and harmful subsidies. D1 is international public funding, which is basically international cooperation funding, domestic public funding, and then private funding, which was the most challenging indicator of them all. Next slide, please. So this is the important part of the work of the TEG on these indicators. The metadata sheets that we produce or the discussions that we had as a TEG really reflected sort of the, let's say, the overall state of affairs in regards to reporting on the finance indicators on these flows. So the metadata sheets, they were not only designed to give sort of the information on the indicator, the disaggregation, but it also has guidance on how to apply them and how to apply them concretely. One of the concerns that we had is, okay, we're giving this to parties, how are parties going to use that, right? So that concern of, okay, you're giving more job to someone or to countries, and how are they going to, use their existing capacities to report on this, was reflected in the work the TEG did. Regarding other parts of the monitoring framework, we also analyze how this would look in the reporting tool, right? So reporting on financial indicators in the end, for 18.1, it's not a number, like it's not like a value number. It's basically number of subsidies. For 18.2, D1, D2, and D3, it is a number that has to be constructed. And the details of that can be found in the metadata sheets and the guidance process. So what is key about these indicators is that the reporting, this is sort of an optional framework. What we are proposing are ways, databases, categories for the expenditures in a way that makes sense, right? Because one of the biggest problems that we sort of encounter is that expenditures in biodiversity are not well understood. In fact, for example, in the private sector, you have around in some countries, you have 80% of the companies don't really understand what biodiversity is, right? Or what is a biodiversity expenditure. So taking that into account, as we started to sort of delve into, we found out that there are existing databases that collect information. So for example, for indicators 18.1 and 18.2, you already have systems that are capturing this information that countries can use if they wanted to come up with a number, right? For D1, for D2, and D3, as I'm going to show them to you, there's different and special considerations that I have to take into account. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is headline indicator 18.1. So in terms of positive incentives, as I said, this just requires to give a number of the positive incentives. This indicator was reworked. There was a lot of conversations whether it was a value number or it was just a number of incentives. The TEG decided to recommend that it's just a number for the time being. It can be reworked in the future, but it makes sense right now to have it like that. The component indicators sort of reflect the categories that are out there, particularly in the PINE database of the OECD, which was sort of the main sort of database and capture tool that we found that was useful for this process. Countries can use it. We've spoken to we spoke with the OECD about the possibility of expanding its reach for other countries. It's something that can be done, but let's say it's an easy way of capturing the information. The disaggregation that you see there, it basically provides guidance in the reporting tool. If you, for example, if you're a party or if you're a country that does not know what these categories or how to, let's say, how to report on this, you can take those categories and you can divide your sort of your flows and say, okay, we have this, we don't have this, we have this, we have this, and then you can come up with a number. Next slide, please. What I just said is reflected in this slide. So you can see sort of the process that we went through the indicators. I'm not going to go through each of one of them, but here you can reflect some of the sort of the considerations that we took into account to sort of design or review the headline indicator and then discuss the different methodologies, databases, and disaggregation. The important thing here is that disaggregation makes sense because it gives guidance to countries on how, it's a suggested sort of disaggregation. You can have more categories or you might not have, but then you can use them to get the number that you need for this indicator. Next slide, please. So 18.2, as you can see, this indicator, the disaggregation is important because some of the categories, again, the main sort of database and the main system of collection, the OECD already has it. It just sneaks, depending on the categories that you report, you can do it, let's say as a party, you can basically say, okay, these are the categories that we want to report on. These are the ones that make sense. And then you can do it. Or if you have more categories, you can use them too, right? The important thing here is to keep in mind that the guidance for these indicators is optional, right? You still have to provide a number, but you can say we have other ways of calculating it. And I think that's very important to know because I know there's some questions about, okay, is this sort of a mandatory thing? Are you going to use the OECD as a mandatory database? And that's not the case. Next slide, please. So international public funding. So in this indicator, again, we found that there's already existing databases, methods of collecting and giving numbers to countries. It's a very, let's say, right now in its current state of affairs, the methodologies that actually provide the number are there, and therefore we didn't have a lot of problems with the indicator. This is one of the easiest ones. Next slide, please. Domestic public funding, this was one of the hardest indicators that we had. And the reason for this, it's because it's not, so we have two problems. There's not a universal methodology to capture, fundings coming from countries. And then the other issue that we had was, okay, what is a national expenditure in biodiversity, right? What is the flow? Because in different countries, you have different systems, different categories, different accounts, and therefore trying to come up with a number that makes sense and that it's comparable was sort of a difficulty. However, we found that within the different methodologies out there, they can be used to provide a number that, again, it's an imperfect solution to a very complex problem, but it kickstarts the conversation on how these methodologies interact and how we can get better numbers. There's also guidance on what are some recommended categories that you can use to sort of locate and know what an expenditure in biodiversity is, because one of the problems that we sort of explore is, okay, how are we going to provide guidance? How are countries going to know? Some countries they have more capacity to sort of report on these numbers. Some countries don't actually have the categories. In the guidance document, there's some recommendations to move forward and the ways you can do it at a local level. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. Domestic private funding. This was the most complicated one. We had a consultancy that worked really hard in trying to figure out how we can get on this number, considering that there's no universal system. In fact, there's nothing out there apart from studies, some articles that shed light on this. But the tech really focused on trying to provide guidance to the countries on how to get to these numbers, how to work with their private sector partners, and therefore the disaggregation and the complementary indicators reflect that. And in this aggregation, you can see that the recommended categories that you can report will allow you to sort of have an idea of what is the private, let's say the universe of private funding that comes into biodiversity. Next slide, please. The slide is on guidance on the methodology. I'm not gonna go in detail. The last comment I will tell you about this is that please review the metadata sheets. There's a lot of information there that, despite some of it being very technical, there's a lot of actual practical information. And, we took into account across the entire process, IPLCs, how these flows are being distributed to communities. There's a lot of work there that was done by the TEG in order to reflect broader conversations that, are being had towards COP16. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Juan. And moving swiftly on, if I may, please, Antaka, if I can ask you to guide us through the ABS indicator work, please. Thank you.
I'm saying that I'm very short, so the microphone is a little bit. Good morning, delegates. I'm also presenting on behalf of my AHTEG member, Amber, who couldn't be here. So I'll be very brief and I'll be taking you through the indicators for access and benefit sharing. And just to remind you that Decision 15.5 on the monitoring framework contain a placeholder indicator for access and benefit sharing for Goal C as well as Target 13. And subsequent to that, the Secretariat commissioned a study on to further develop the indicators as they relate to what was contained on the framework. And then the study was commissioned to Leibniz Institute in Germany, as well as with the general support and from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and the Northern Ireland. And I just want to indicate that the detailed report on the study is contained on CBD SBSTTA 26 document number 2. Next slide, please. And just to a brief reminder in terms of what is contained in Goal C, this is what the target, the goal look like. And there are key elements that we need to take into account when we are developing the indicator, which also include aspects relating to monetary and non-monetary benefit sharing, ensuring that shared fairly and equitably, substantial increase by 2050 and in accordance with the international agreed access and benefit sharing instruments. Next slide, please. And this, and also I just want to remind you again in terms of the elements of Target 13, which also requires parties to take effective legal policy, administrative and capacity building measures. And also one of the key elements is the international access and benefit sharing instrument, of which we'll be explaining in detail in the elements of the indicators. Just to refresh your mind a bit, colleagues, is that you may wish to note that the headline indicator as contained in the monitoring framework as agreed by COP, it was on indicator on monetary benefit received, as well as C2 as on indicator on non-monetary benefit. And this is part of the headline indicator. And we also adopted a binary indicator on the number of countries that have taken effective policy, administrative, and capacity measures and so forth. And all this information, you can find them on the documents that are prescribed there on my presentation. And just want to indicate that there were also complementary and component indicators, and in the consideration that was made by the AHTEG, there were certain changes that were made on Goal C. You remember that there was a specific reference on the integration of biodiversity into national accounting and reporting system, and that have been deleted from the complementary indicator under Goal C. And then under Goal D, there were subsequent amendments, which also include, we deleted the total number of permits or their equivalent granted for access to, or to genetic resources, reference to other issue relating to the total number of the international recognized certificates and so forth, and many others. And quickly, I just want to also articulate some of the challenges that we found on the headline indicators as adopted by the Conference of the Party. It was that there is no existing methodology or data for these indicators. There is a need to move from measuring implementation and to measuring benefit that is shared. And then if you look at the some of the challenges as articulated in the studies, that some of these ABS bilateral contracts are not shared. And then there is like issues pertaining the logistical different system in place where some of this information are decentralized, and then there's a time lag that can be experienced between the signing of the contract and the receiving of the benefits. So those are some of the aspects that we need to take into account, and most of the of these agreements are confidential. So and not all information can be shared. So those are some of the challenges that we are encountering on the reporting on this indicator. All right, so next slide, please. And then based on the outcomes and the recommendation that are contained on the study, we, as the AHTEG, made the following new proposed headline indicator, of which for C1, we propose that the wording be presented as follows: monetary benefits received in accordance with applicable international agreed access and benefit instrument. And this one is to further refine what was on C1, and then C2 can be, the headline indicator must read as non-monetary benefits that are arising from applicable international agreed ABS instrument. And the solution that we are proposing for the monetary benefits is that countries can now aggregate all the monetary benefit at a national level and report the aggregated amount in USD. And then the other multilateral ABS instruments, such as the international treaty, the new BBNJ, and the DSI, then can also be support in terms of reporting on the monetary in their respective fund. And the good thing about these proposed headline indicators is that they can aggregate it across all of these headline indicators. All right. And for goal C, the new proposed headline indicator, we're also proposing that for the non-monetary benefits, we need to consolidate the 17 Nagoya Protocol Annex chapter into 5 overarching categories. You wish to recall that there are 5 types of non-monetary benefits that are contained on they were also contained in the national report for ABS, and that include the sharing of information, research and research results, number of scientific publications that are relevant to the conservation and sustainable use, scientific collaboration or any joint publication, capacity building, access and to transfer of technology, and also looking at the sustainable and development benefits. And those, the good thing about those, you can able to disaggregate or to collect data through at national level and at national level using those aggregations. So for target 13, again, I think reference can be made on the previous elements that I've just presented, but it then takes the elements of considering the, just to rehash, the possible disaggregation can also make reference to those monetary benefits that have been received by indigenous people and local communities for C1, and then for C2, then it also look at those non-monetary benefits received by indigenous people and local communities. That's how you can disaggregate the two. And moving to how to aggregate the monetary benefits, we can consider the trend in the amount of benefit that have received by countries in accordance with their applicable international ABS instruments. We can consider information through the CBD National Focal Point, taking into looking at the information for the bilateral through the bilateral received information that we need to collect, that we collect at national level. We can also look at other information that is coming through the international treaty, or consider all types of the monetary benefits that are contained in the respective annex of the Nagoya Protocol. And then some of the key recommendation in respect to the monetary benefits. So through the study, there were countries that indicated that they do have collecting national fund that can support them in terms of the collection of the monetary benefits that arise from the benefit shared. And then there is then consideration of confidential issues that might arise, which even include the standardized language that can be included in the mutual agreed terms to allow countries to then report on the benefit that have been received at the aggregated level. And then parties are also being requested that they can, or it's being recommended that parties can also consider including the clause in their mutual agreed terms for the users to report on the benefit shared, and also developing additional information that can improve information system that can support the permitting systems and also assist in terms of monitoring the MET. And also there is a need to build capacity to report on the monetary benefit sharing on this indicator. So, and then how can we then aggregate the non-monetary benefit? And then there are some key examples that are coming through in which I already spoke to in terms of the 5 categories, and which can also be aggregated through the number of research which can be done at a global level. The joint scientific cooperation can also be aggregated, it can be collected at global level, sorry, both of them are in global level. And also the scientific publication that are relevant to conservation and sustainable use, food security, which can also be collected at a global level. And the following 3 can be then collected through national at a national level, and that includes the number of technology transfer events that arise from the ABS instrument, number of projects that contribute to sustainable use, sustainable development, and also the indicator that is related to capacity building as part of the non-monetary benefits. And what we are recommending for the non-monetary benefits is that the aggregation on the trends of non-monetary benefits can change over time, and therefore the disaggregation of that information for genetic resources and knowledge, traditional knowledge, and through the type of the beneficiaries, which include indigenous people and local communities. And also we can also disaggregate it by the different types of ABS instrument. I've already spoke about the BBNJ, the international treaty, and DSI. So then the recommendation for the non-monetary benefit as articulated is that the methodology is still under development, and what the recommendation are looking at now is to make sure that the information will be available to countries to support reporting, and then the pilot phase will be peer reviewed by COP16, and then subject to availability of resources and possible pool expansion of the instrument. We can also consider useful information for the countries, and the methodology can also be complemented by any available national information. And then in terms of additional information, recommendation for the non-binary, for the national collected types, the challenges are that data is not generally compiled or available, and reporting may be challenging, and parties may need the support to develop an online platform and training on the data collection and management, and then aspects relating to possibility of establishing a global user reporting platform to support those countries can be an option. And then there is further work that is required for this indicator to allow the measure for non-monetary benefits that related to capacity building and development. And therefore, developments for Target 20 could then be helpful to support parties. And then for the multilateral recommendation, and in order for us to enable aggregation across ABS instrument, the CBD, and the DSI multilateral mechanism and the BBJ, parties should anticipate the need to monitor benefit sharing under the Global Biodiversity Framework and be able to aggregate with other instruments, including indicators during the development of the mechanism and proactively integrate it into the negotiated text. And therefore to support, and this will also support the aggregation of data on non-monetary benefit sharing across all ABS instruments. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Nataka. A huge amount of material to cover there. And I'd also like to thank Amber Schultz, who's online at Leibniz Institute, who led the work for the study. And Melania, I think, is in the room. I'm not sure where you are, who was the lead author. Thank you very much, Melania. So obviously lots of details there potentially to discuss. We're running somewhat behind time, so I'm going to take Chair's prerogative to be able to change the timetable. So what I'm going to do is to firstly introduce three people who are behind me. I'm then going to ask Maria to do a very short presentation on the gap analysis and the capacity building work. And then I'm going to take questions across everything, because that way we can make sure we cover the rest of the material. And we might just eat into lunchtime a little bit. So we'll see how we go. But firstly, if I can introduce Roberto Correa from UNEP WCMC, who's leading quite a lot of the work on the capacity building survey. Flavio Affinito, who's been working under contract to the Secretariat to support a lot of the work and a lot of the editing that we've been doing on the INF documents, and hugely appreciate the amount of effort that he's put in on that. And Tim Hirsch from GBIF, who was very much involved in the initial work to develop the gap analysis in terms of breaking down the targets and goals into elements, following the sorts of work that was done for the previous Global Biodiversity Outlook and the way that that analysis was done. So, Maria, if I can pass across to you, please, and then if you can do a very short presentation, and we'll then open up questions overall. Thank you.
Thank you. So just three quick slides to set the scene of the work that the AHTEG did on identifying the needs to work further to really implement the monitoring framework. So in Annex 2 of the document of SBSTTA/2, we will have, you can find this table where there is the steps needed to finish the work and make every indicator that is there in the headline and binary indicators fully operational. So here is the first issue of the concrete needs to develop and continue and finish the work for each of the indicators. That is the first part. Then in the guidelines of section C, we also have identify items that need more data, topics that need to be further worked, discussed, and integrated. So these are the other inputs that you can have for prioritize the work ahead on this section. And finally, we also work on a robust gap analysis. What we did is that for every target and goal, We analyze the text of that target and then analyze how the indicators, headline, complementary, component, binary, support each of those elements within each target and goal. And those results are in Annex 3, and also in INF 19, you have the full results of that analysis. In the INF 19, you can also find the opportunities for the global biodiversity observation system to enhance and facilitate the implementation of the monitoring framework, and the results of the gap of the capacity needs from parties that WCMC did. So that is a very important document for you to take a look in those regards. But overall, what the AHTEG really recognized is that with the 5 type of indicators, headline, binary, component, complementary, and the national indicators, we have a good set of indicators that can give us initial comprehensive look at where we are in the implementation of the GBF. So although there are many things that still need to be done, we are in a good stage to start implementing some of these things. So I just have one maybe quick question for Tim and Roberto, and is just maybe if you can take the mic and in 1 minute answer these questions. Which are the priorities and the opportunities for implementing the GBF monitoring framework? So like, which are the top priorities? And then I think James can continue with the sharing of the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll have an attempt to do that from the point of view of the gap analysis. And I think just a brief step back, the approach to the gap analysis was to look at the full text of all of the 27 goals and targets, and to understand what that really amounts to in terms of specific elements that you would need to measure separately in order to answer the question of whether these indicators fully, partially, or completely covered the full range of the framework. In doing that analysis and that textual analysis, if you like, what we found is, because of the complexity of many of those targets, what you end up with is, out of those 27 goals and targets, no fewer than 190 separate elements that really we felt need to be measured. The overall message from that is that the headline and binary indicators alone, if you look at the percentage, the proportion of elements within each goal and target that are covered by those, there are very significant gaps. But the addition of the complementary and component indicators lead to a more complete, but by no means a complete set of complete coverage of all of those elements. So I think the priority really, to some extent, depends on the individual priorities per country. You can look at all of those elements, see where the gaps are in terms of the existing indicators, and from that develop the priorities for investment in, first of all, improved data systems, and also in development of national indicators that can address some of those gaps. So I'm not being very specific on that, because I think it's important to look at the full analysis which was carried out by the AHTEG to really look at where some of the strengths and weaknesses are across the different goals and targets.
Thank you, Tim. Roberto, can I come to you, please?
Yes, to succinctly summarize the main findings of the capacity assessment survey, I would say that parties have reported that there is capacity for certain headline indicators. What these indicators tend to have is an established methodology. In other words, the table previously presented by James that have a status from 3, 4, or 5. And the other thing is having a champion institution backing that indicator with sort of collection of relevant data, producing guidance and methodologies, and supporting parties in that regard. So addressing the capacities for those indicators that currently do not have an established methodology is will be key to addressing the gaps from the monitoring framework itself, particularly for the headline indicators. And then once that's sort of established, then it'll be sort of refining that methodology to adapt to parties. The capacity needs most requested by parties was training for assistance analyzing the indicator at the national level. Now, the metadata contained in InfDoc 14 does have a section 6 that does disaggregate the differences between calculating the indicator at the national level. And as James also previously alluded to, working with parties in tandem to understand how can we sort of refine that to better tailor to those needs. In terms of data collection, institutional coordination will be vital. And finally, as has been previously alluded to, the financial mobilization of resources for this capacity development for the monitoring and implementation of the monitoring framework and the GBF itself will be pivotal. And all this is contained in the figures in Annex 2 of InfDoc 19.
Thank you, Roberto. We've hit you with an enormous amount of information this morning. In some ways, I'm not sorry for that, because we've done a lot of work. And this workshop is just part of the work that we've done to try and provide information. There is a huge amount in the InfDocs. There is also the webinars, the 17 webinars, that's a lot, that we've done over the last month and a half to try and provide information on individual indicators. So obviously very happy to answer questions now, very happy that people on the panel and other members of the AHTEG who are here, I'm sure will be very happy to have conversations in the margins over the next few days as we move forwards. But I would recommend, if you haven't seen some of those webinars, that they're a very good resource as well. So we have a short time for questions. As Gillian said, it's old style, put your hand up and I'll invite you to speak. Over there. Yep, you.
Thank you very much.
I saw some.
First of all, we all need these presentations, if it's possible, to prepare ourselves for the SBSTTA issue related to all of these important ones. Number two, I think the three groups did a very good job. And I think without the three groups, whether traditional knowledge or financing or ABS, GBF will not be implemented, because they are the ones that need a lot of work, not only from your side, from scientific point of view, but from national level, policy level, whatever, etc. For the fact that all of these issues, I'm a person that I deal with CBD since it was established in 1992. They are in the convention articles, many decisions and protocols, whatever. And can we afford to move very quickly to all of these indicators that will require huge national efforts if they want to do it? Now, my question is, if we couldn't make it because of all of these complications, can I suggest something different? Not necessarily to be an indicator with metadata, whatever. I call it it has ethical indicators, if it's possible. For a long time, all of this biodiversity, we keep saying these are God creation, and we are to use them properly. And this is well documented in traditional knowledge in all religions and whatever, etc. Can we just prepare something to make it simple, to make people, whether at the mosque or church, to be aware of all of these? Because until now, the issue of biodiversity is not like climate change or whatever. So ethical indicator, ethical knowledge about these genetic resources will be required, because this is no other alternative. All of these indicators, with all of this metadata, whatever, I am questioning at national level whether we would be able to absorb them, we would be able to get resources to be implement them, or even capacity, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. A quick response, if I may, and I'm not going to try and respond in detail on that. I think what you're linking to is part of the conversations that we had at the Article 8J meeting in Geneva last year in terms of the cultural links with biodiversity. And I think that part of this is around that diagram I showed about the idealism and pragmatism. And I think that we are going to need to move forward with a balance between both. Lady behind, please.
Thank you. My name is Melania Munoz from Leibniz DSMC, and I have a couple of comments. First, related to, thank you very much for the excellent presentations we had today. And first, I would like to comment on the presentation of traditional knowledge indicators, especially in the slide on current status of the indicators. And I would like to know, well, it's just a comment that why not to include the disaggregations for the indicators C1 and C2 related to benefit sharing, because traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources is also very important under the convention and the Nagoya Protocol. And we propose some disaggregations by benefits, monetary and non-monetary benefits received by indigenous people and local communities. So I think it would be a good idea to integrate the information. And then the other comment is that I'm part of the authors leading the ABS indicators study, and I am available for everybody if you, in case you have more specific questions during the substack. Thank you.
Thank you, Melania. And yes, I'm sure people will want to talk to you about the detail of that. Maurizio, do you want to comment at all briefly?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. In fact, actually, in a longer presentation, we had included them. And then just to keep things very succinct, we took them out only just because the disaggregation proposed under Goal C and Target 13 were not explicitly the four traditional knowledge indicators. But that was the only reason. But I fully agree with your suggestion. So it will be brought back together. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. I've just seen somebody in front of me there in the middle, please. I'll try and come to people. Keep bringing your hands up. It's difficult to keep track on both sides of the room.
Thanks, James. Hello, everyone. Congratulations again to the AHTEG and to the open-ended working group on Article 8J. I think the two groups did tremendous work towards improving the indicators. We heard a lot today about traditional knowledge indicators. We heard about human rights indicators. So these are extremely important in the context of indigenous peoples and local communities. But I would like to bring something to the table that, to my understanding, is still missing, which is indicators related to the health of indigenous peoples and local communities. This is a tremendous gap. There is the draft revised plan of action on biodiversity and health, but we know that indigenous peoples and local communities are disproportionately affected by chemical pollution, and this is nowhere on the table yet. And honestly, this baffles me. As opposed to other indicators where there is no methodology or metadata, the health indicators worldwide are recognized, and they are disaggregated for indigenous peoples and local communities as well in many cases. This is one of the cases of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And I should say, I probably didn't introduce myself. I'm Manuela from the Minamata Convention on Mercury, but I also speak on behalf of the BRS conventions, our sister chemical conventions, the Basel and Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions. So this is something to put on the table. I have more suggestions on other targets as well, but I will refrain from talking about those now. But I would love to hear some thoughts about indicators for health of indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Melania. Gillian.
I I think that this is definitely something that has been recognized as important. And as you probably have seen on the SBSTTA agenda, which we're not talking about today, the biodiversity and health item, in that document, there is a proposal to further develop indicators. In the SBSTTA recommendation that's coming from the AHTEG, it mentions that work. And again, in the biodiversity and health document, you will see that there is an intention to develop indicators. I think this would need to be discussed here as well. It was recognized that a lot of gaps in knowledge are there, and so there is a proposal under that recommendation.
Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you very much for the floor. Yes, I do first agree with Professor Fuda from Egypt that these two aspects are the key of the implementation of the GBF. And yeah, but here my question is on how will we monitor the ABS, the benefit sharing arising from the use of the DSI, particularly according to the proposed multilateral mechanism. Thank you.
So my understanding is that the conversations that are going on about DSI are very active. And I believe that there is another conversation that's going to be happening later this week or between SBSTTA and SBI about the DSI. So I think, to be honest, I would prefer to let those conversations happen and to see what comes out of those in terms of how do we make best use of the conversations there, the agreements that are being brought together. It's clearly a very, very important and very pertinent subject. I absolutely agree with you on that. But I think those conversations maybe need to develop further to be then able to take that question into account. And I know that may seem that I'm dodging the question, but I'm very conscious of an ongoing process, and I wouldn't wish to prejudge the answers that are coming out of that process. Marty, I think you had a hand up as well. No, there are others. I'll come back.
Thank you, James, and thank you to the co-chairs and the AHTEG for the huge work you have done, especially on Section C. We are quite thankful for that amount of information. We called the SBSTTA 25 request to the AHTEG that if time was available, that you could look into the elements currently not covered by headline indicators, especially those targets where we only have the discussion of binary indicators and how to fill these gaps. Could you maybe in general explain how you approach this request from SBSTTA 25 and where to find these inputs? Thank you.
So I'll come to Tim, if I may, in just a second. That's the gap analysis that we undertook, and Tim has described a little bit about the elements, but I think the key point there is the information that you're looking for is in INF 19. That only came out relatively recently. Apologies, but it was time permitting in terms of being able to draw together the information and be able to undertake the analysis. So, Tim, do you want to add to that at all?
Yes, maybe, I mean, looking at the detail of what you'll find when you go into InfDoc 19, there are a couple of summary tables that take this approach of looking at all of those 190 elements that I referred to, broken down by goal and targets. It shows the proportion in each case of those elements within a goal and target that are either covered by the different categories of indicators, partially, potentially covered, or not at all. And so what you can get from that is at least a fairly graphic illustration, target by target, of where that additional investment or investigation needs to go to be able to fill those gaps. I would just take maybe one example. If you take target 5, for example, on sustainable use, what you find there is that if you just take the headline indicator alone, the coverage is very low because the headline indicator relates only to sustainable fisheries, but there are obviously the other elements are simply not covered by the available indicators. So although it doesn't, what we couldn't do really was to fill those gaps, at least it helps to tease out where the relatively good and relatively poor coverage is, and therefore where the investigation and the effort needs to focus.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to take a couple more questions and then I'm going to suggest we break for lunch. And the reason for that is not because your questions aren't important, but because I want people to have enough time for lunch, and because my colleagues who are leading this afternoon's discussions, I'm sure, don't want you to be late back from that lunch. They want you in the room listening to what they've got to say and asking questions of them. So there's a gentleman in the middle there who caught my eye, and then there's one at the back there. If I can take those two.
Thank you very much. I will be quickly prompting to the question without, any introduction. I am Rizwan Irshad from Pakistan, and I'm desk officer for CBD, and I am the person who will be, held responsible that what is happening and what are the things going on. I feel comfortable that a lot of seriousness is expressed while meaningful indicators are going to be developed. But at the same time, the complexity of the issue and the capacity of the stakeholders who are going to respond, that is also very significant. And one question that comes to my mind is the role of early action support project that is executed in many countries. And in case of Pakistan, it is executed through UNDP. So it could be used as a very powerful tool to transfer the same intensity the scientists and the minds over here they are having in their mind about the indicators, and these should be transferred directly to the right people, and so that it should be incorporated in the national targets. And of course it will give them ownership, and of course we will be held responsible while reporting. So this is my comment, and at the same time question that how we can use this tool for effectively communicating the indicators for national targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, I think there's a really important point there about building that capacity at a national level. And I think it's part of what Professor Food has referred to already. And colleague from DRC, sorry, I'm afraid I don't know your name. But I think that this whole issue about the mechanisms to be able to multiply, to be able to bring into place the resources at a national level is going to be the next step that SBSTTA and COP need to be thinking about. And that's actually a political question as much as a technical one. So I think it's something that we all need to be considering how we can implement at a national level. And just to reassure you, we've been looking in the United Kingdom at this whole area. We've been undertaking a review of our national biodiversity indicators. We've got work to do as well. It's not just the developing world, it's the developed world as well. It's going to have to actually pull its socks up to be able to implement this monitoring framework. Gillian wants to come in as well.
I just wanted to quickly mention that Natasha over here from UNEP WCMC, she is helping to coordinate the Jeff Early Action Support for component 2 of that project, which is on monitoring. So to not take up time, I would suggest that there is a component of the early action support on the monitoring, and this person will be able to help you.
Excellent. I'm sure, Natasha, you're going to get lots of questions now. I said there was one question at the back there, this gentleman, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Harrison from Cameroon. My question, I want to appreciate the presenters, especially on ABS, and my question goes to the presenters on ABS. When I see we've come out with indicators on benefit sharing, which monitoring and non-monitoring benefits, but my worry now is on track and traces. And one of the problems that most of the parties face internally is the the monetary benefits, which is declared in percentages by the company that is buying. What mechanism do we put in place to monitor to such that this monetary benefits, the percentage that is supposed to be paid back, could be tracked, could be traced, such that the countries are aware and the beneficiaries, even the communities, aware of the actual benefit that is coming to them? How do we track and trace this to be sure that if it is 1%, it is 5%, it is that amount that comes? Thank you.
It's a huge challenge. I don't underestimate it. I'm actually going to, if I may, suggest that there's a conversation between yourself and Melania in terms of the development of the work that they've undertaken. I'm not an expert in this area myself, so I'm not going to try and answer that question. What I am going to do is to say thank you very much indeed, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest. I am sure that there will be conversations over lunchtime and over the next few days. Please can I thank all of the presenters who've helped us with this morning's workshop, and particularly thank Maria as co-chair for helping us to take this all forwards and bring it back to you for your political discussions from the technical work that we've undertaken. Thank you.
Dear delegates, we all knew how complex issue of monitoring is from documents already, but now we had a chance to hear it from experts. First of all, I wish to thank co-chairs of AHTEG on monitoring, Ms. Maria Cecilia Londoño Murcia and Mr. James Williams for providing all this information and working all time with their teams for very short time actually, and producing so robust results. This is the end of our workshop related to AHTEG on monitoring framework. I hope everything what you had here is useful and will be used in next days during SBSTTA 26. Now we will break for a lunch for 1 hour. And please be here to continue with results of other two AHTEGs in 1:15.